I've asked Sally to take care of the house, but I told her to call a care worker if she runs into any trouble and to only take care of the bare essentials. Well, I'm off now. Watching my son Brian's back as he leaves early in the morning with luggage for a 5-day business trip, I started preparing breakfast. Since suffering a stroke, cooking had become a struggle, but thanks to my research into time-saving recipes and easier ways to do household chores, it seemed manageable. I and my daughter-in-law Sally quietly ate breakfast together, then prepared to go to physical therapy. Soon, I heard Sally quickly leaving the house. She's off to play already. I knew this would happen. Sally puts on a good face in front of Brian, but in reality, she doesn't do any housework and just plays around. Despite my frustration, I headed to my physical therapy center. When I returned home from physical therapy, for some reason, the front door wouldn't open. After knocking at the front door a few times in desperation, the door quietly opened, but it was chain-locked as if to prevent any other intruders.
Hey, Sally, you're there, right? Can't you let me in?
Confused, I called out, only to hear laughter from inside. You're in the way since you can hardly do any housework. If you want to sleep, why don't you use the sleeping bag Brian used to use in the shed? Sally said mockingly and then slammed the front door, leaving me out in the cold. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. But then I thought, maybe this was an opportunity. I made a decision. Fine, I won't come in. But don't complain about where or when I sleep. Saying this to the firmly closed front door, I slowly started walking down the dark street. I am a 55-year-old housewife named Michelle, living with her son Brian and his wife Sally. Before getting married, she worked as a regular office worker. While working, I had opportunities to meet people, but not much in the way of romantic encounters. I spent my weekends and holidays at mixers, arranged by a colleague who joined the company at the same time. At one mixer, there were 4 women, including me and my friends, and 4 men, at a pub near the station. When they arrived, there were only 3 men, with the 4th saying he was on his way from work. After about 5 minutes, a man in a suit named Henry arrived, apologizing for being late. My name is Henry, I'm sorry for being late. Compared to the other men, he had a kind, gentle face, and wasn't very tall. As they talked, I found myself increasingly interested in his conversational rhythm, tone, hobbies, and considerate personality. The other women were focused on the most handsome man there. But I couldn't take my eyes off Henry.
Really, Michelle? You're into that average-looking, utterly ordinary guy?
My friends were surprised by my choice. Despite their somewhat negative opinions, I was determined.
Got it. If you're that serious, Michelle will help out.
After the first round, as they were discussing what to do next, my colleagues distracted the men, allowing me to pull Henry aside. I'm a bit tipsy. Can you come with me to the restroom? I think there's one in that supermarket over there. With a signal to my colleagues, they suggested to the men to go ahead to the next venue, leaving me and Henry alone. Are you okay? If you're feeling sick, let's get to the restroom quickly.
Actually, I'm not drunk or feeling sick. Sorry for tricking you. But I really wanted to be alone with you, Henry.
So, you're not feeling unwell? That's a relief. I was worried. If you're okay, that's great. Despite the deceit, Henry was more concerned about my well-being than being angry. His kindness only deepened my affection for him. If it's okay with you, would you like to grab a drink, just the 2 of us? At first, Henry was taken aback by my invitation, but then he bashfully agreed. We moved to a quieter bar, where we talked and got to know each other, shared work gripes, and grew closer. As the night went on, I almost fell, but Henry caught me. Overwhelmed by his gaze, I softly kissed him, and we became a couple. A year later, despite predictions of our relationship not lasting, we got married. I continued working for a while after marriage, but once our son Brian was born, my husband asked me to prioritize childcare and housework. Accepting his request, I quit my job to become a full-time homemaker, dedicating myself to my family. I always hoped this happy time would last forever. But suddenly, one day, it all came crashing down with a loud noise. This was 3 years ago. After graduating from college, my son Brian got a job at a local company and had been married for 2 years to a woman named Sally. Just as I thought more happiness was on the way with our growing family, my husband passed away in a car accident on his way to work. We used to say he would surely live a long life because of his vitality, but this tragedy happened all too suddenly. I couldn't believe it until I saw his body. I even told Brian he must have just been injured. I don't remember, but apparently, I saw my husband's body at the hospital and broke down crying loudly. For a while, I couldn't recover from his death, spending my days in a daze. But looking at his portrait, where he's smiling, I sometimes felt like he looked sad.
Yes, I understand. I can't cry forever, you wouldn't be able to rest in peace in heaven. I got it, I'll live strongly for the both of us.
It was as if my husband passed me the baton of life again. Fortunately, because my husband had been saving money in the bank for our retirement and had insurance for emergencies, we had enough savings to live comfortably without luxury. Brian, concerned about me, suggested that he, Sally, and I live together as a family of 3 in my parents' house. Brian works from morning till late at night, and Sally is often out with friends, so I handle all the household chores. However, the joy of being able to support my family outweighs the hardship. But there was a point of concern. Sally, Brian's wife. Sally, like me, had been a housewife living with Brian. When I moved in, she didn't start working part-time or helping with housework. Instead, she spent her time playing with friends. Brian probably knows that Sally is neglecting her duties, but for some reason, he doesn't scold her and even gives her an allowance. I've been unable to talk about Sally's behavior. When Brian introduced Sally to me, I met her mother Nancy for the first time. We hit it off because we both had lost our husbands, and since then, we've been close. I haven't been able to bring up my concerns to avoid worrying Nancy. It's harder to deal with emotions than physical tasks. The frustration and mental burden of not being able to confide in anyone was weighing heavily on me. Then, one day, it happened suddenly. As usual, I prepared breakfast for Brian and Sally, and sent Brian off to work.
I'm going out with my friends today, so I'll leave the house in your care.
I'll be back tonight. After Brian left for work, I began my day by seeing off Sally. I cleaned around the sink and stove, did the laundry, and followed my planned household routine. After hanging the family's bedding to air out and vacuuming, I picked up 2 full trash bags to take to the garbage station. Suddenly, my vision blurred, and I was struck by a strong dizziness. I lost my balance and collapsed with a dull thud. When I woke up, an unfamiliar ceiling stretched above me. My body felt heavy from the neck down, and I could hardly move. Managing to turn my head, I saw an 4 in my arm and a heart rate monitor. It seemed like I was in a hospital. Someone must have noticed something wrong and called an ambulance. As I was trying to make sense of the situation, a nurse came in and, seeing me conscious, went to call the doctor. The doctor explained what had happened to me and why I was in the hospital.
A stroke?
I had a severe dizzy spell, which is a symptom of a stroke, likely caused by my high blood pressure. My neighbor, who came to visit me, had found me. She heard a loud noise from inside the house and found the door unlocked, discovering me collapsed inside. The heaviness I felt since waking up was probably due to the stroke. As time passed, I regained sensation in my left side, but my right side remained weak. The doctor said I had damaged the part of my brain that controls movement on the right side when I fell, causing paralysis. However, with physical therapy, I could regain enough movement to live with minimal assistance. After a month of hard physical therapy, I could slowly walk on my own. I would need to continue visiting the hospital and doing physical therapy to fully recover the use of my right side, but it was nothing compared to living an impaired life. During my hospital stay, Brian, busy with work, sent apologetic messages and expressed his concern. The ones who came to pick me up upon discharge were Brian and Sally, who hadn't visited me once.
Thanks for coming to pick me up. Was work okay?
Oh, taking a day off is no big deal. I managed to get a lot done while I couldn't visit you. Are you doing okay? Sally asked innocently, popping up from behind Brian. While Brian was loading the luggage he used during my hospital stay into the car, Sally just watched, fiddling with her phone. I've been wondering what Brian really sees in her lately.
Let's head home. Mom, you've done so much for us, now it's my turn to help out. Rest easy.
Although I felt some anxiety about going home, Brian's words brightened my spirits.
Thank you, Brian, Sally. I really appreciate it.
Brian smiled in response to my heartfelt thanks, but Sally's expression seemed somewhat displeased at the edge of my vision. And so, I finally returned home. Thanks to my physical therapy, I was still somewhat limited but could take care of myself if I took my time. I think I haven't been much of a burden to them. I only needed help with things like lifting heavy objects or reaching high places, which were difficult for me now. Otherwise, I tried to do as much as I could on my own. Not satisfied with only moving during physical therapy, I did housework to get as close to my old self as possible. Brian, perhaps out of concern for me, started coming home from work by 6 p.m. instead of late at night and actively helped with household chores, a change from before.
Mom, is the seasoning for this dish just like it says in your notes?
He was trying to cook, occasionally mistaking one seasoning for another. But he seemed to enjoy the challenge positively. As for Sally, she started coming home earlier to match Brian's schedule, but whenever he had to work late, she still went out to play as usual. Brian probably thinks she's taking care of me, but telling him the truth would only complicate things. I didn't want to cause trouble, given the situation. So, with Brian's help, I managed to handle the household chores as usual. Then, one evening, Brian had something to discuss. It was about an unavoidable 5-day business trip for work. While Brian was on his business trip, he left the house matters to Sally. However, he was unaware that every time he was away for work, Sally would eagerly go out to have fun. She probably put on a good face and nodded in agreement in front of Brian. But most likely, once Brian left for his business trip, she wouldn't do anything around the house as before, and might even spend more time out, possibly not coming home for a whole day. More than worrying about herself, she was anxious about what might happen next. With these worries, time passed, and the day came when Brian left for his business trip.
I've asked Sally to take care of the house, but I've told her to call a care worker if there's any trouble, and I've only left her with the bare essentials to handle. I'll be leaving now.
I watched Brian's back as he left early in the morning with luggage for his trip, then began preparing breakfast for two, thinking Sally would eat too. Cooking had become a struggle since my condition, but thanks to my research into time-saving recipes and easier household methods, I managed. My current state made using a knife risky, but the latest kitchen gadgets allowed me to cook without one, which was a relief. Maybe I won't even need Sally's help. I decided to do as much as I could on my own. At that moment, Sally emerged from the bedroom, rubbing her sleepy eyes.
Oh, has Brian already left? Yes, he's gone. I'm counting on you for these next 5 days, Sally. By the way, are you having breakfast?
I'll eat. And so began our temporary 5-day life together. We quietly ate breakfast, and as I was preparing to go to physical therapy, I heard Sally quickly leaving the house.
She's off to play already. I knew this would happen.
After a 2-hour physical therapy session, I went to a cafe attached to a nearby library for some reading and tea. By the time I headed home, it was evening. When I arrived, the door wouldn't open. After knocking a few times and failing to comprehend the situation, I reluctantly called Sally. Then I heard footsteps from inside, and the door quietly opened, but it was chain-locked as if to prevent anyone else from entering.
Sally, you're there, right? Can you let me in?
I asked, confused, to the presumably present Sally behind the door, and then heard laughter from inside.
Oh, what happened to you? Did you hit your head and forget where you live?
Sally asked mockingly. I couldn't understand what she was really saying at that moment.
I'm not mistaken. Hurry up and let me in. What do you want? You're just in the way at home since you can hardly do any housework.
If you want to sleep, why don't you use the sleeping bag Brian used to use in the shed? She said mockingly and slammed the door shut, leaving me out in the cold. I couldn't comprehend what had happened or why it had come to this. But then I thought, maybe this was an opportunity. Sally had never done any housework and just played around. When Brian came home from work, she acted as if nothing had happened. I had been patient, not wanting to worry Nancy, Sally's mother, with whom I had a good relationship. But I had reached my limit. At that moment, I made a decision. Fine, I won't come in. But don't complain about where or when I sleep. Saying this to the firmly closed door, I began to walk slowly down the darkening street. I realized I had left my cell phone at home, thinking I only had physical therapy today. Without it, I couldn't contact Brian. With no way to reach him, I flagged down a passing taxi and asked to be taken to a certain place. After a 20-minute ride, I arrived at Nancy's house, where I had visited for coffee a few times. It was late, but I had nowhere else to go, and I thought she would understand my situation. I rang the bell, ready to apologize for the intrusion. Hello? Oh, Michelle? What's wrong? Why are you here so late? Oh, by the way, how's your injury? Can I come in for a bit? I'll explain everything later. Surprised by my sudden visit, Nancy kindly let me in. Her house, though not exactly an old farmhouse, had an old-fashioned charm that I always liked. No, that wasn't important now. Nancy helped me to the living room, offered me tea despite the late hour, and tried to contact Sally, but her phone was turned off. So, what happened? You didn't bring any bags, and I can't get a hold of Sally. Did something happen at home? I opened up to Nancy about everything I had been keeping inside. How Sally, after getting married, never helped with housework, how she went out to play all the time when Brian was at work, and how her behavior hadn't changed even after my condition worsened. And that she had locked me out of the house. Nancy was shocked to hear about her daughter's behavior. It seemed she never imagined her daughter was living such a life at her husband's family home. From my visits, I had realized that Nancy was quite a worrier when it came to her daughter. She had always been worried about Sally but never imagined she lived like this. I had always dodged her questions about Sally's well-being, but now, fearing for my own safety, I decided to confide in her. Nancy looked stunned, trying to process everything I had said. I borrowed her phone to call Brian, explaining the situation. It was late, and I worried about disturbing his work, but it was important to talk to him. Hello? Brian? I need to tell you something. I recounted the day's events to Brian. What? Sally did that? And she hasn't been doing anything at home all this time? She always bragged about how hard she worked. Brian had been completely unaware of Sally's actual behavior, believing her fabricated stories. He sounded shaken over the phone. After a few seconds of silence, he said he would leave work in his colleague's hands, get emergency approval, and come back first thing in the morning. I hung up and returned to the living room, where a now resolute-looking Nancy was waiting. Michelle, I want to talk to Sally directly. I need to hear the truth from her. Yes, I understand. Brian will be back from his trip temporarily tomorrow, so let's go see Sally together. So, it was decided that Nancy would join Brian and me in confronting Sally the next day. I apologized for the late disturbance and was about to call a taxi to find a hotel for the night. Nancy insisted it was a waste of money and offered to let me stay at her house. Despite feeling bad for imposing further, I accepted her offer to stay for one night. And the next day. Early in the morning, Nancy drove us to the station to pick up Brian, and the three of us went home to talk to Sally. We couldn't enter the house because I had left my keys inside, so Brian opened the door with his key, and we returned home after several hours. Despite my suspicions, we barged into the slightly open living room door. There, on the sofa, we saw Sally inappropriately close to a man we didn't recognize. What's going on? Brian, unable to contain his anger, woke the man up, pulled him off the sofa, and threw him onto the floor. The man, now with his face on the floor, finally woke up, looked around in confusion, and realized our presence.
Who are you? I'm the husband of the woman you've been sleeping with.
We demanded both of them to explain the situation. Sally, irritated by this sudden intrusion, remained silent. The man she was with began to explain. They met a few months ago on a dating app, got drunk one night, and started a relationship, leading to their current affair. He claimed he didn't know Sally was married, as she had removed her ring and told him she was single. Sally, who had been silent up until now, began to look distressed and broke out in a cold sweat.
Why did you tell them? Everything was going so well, and now it's all ruined.
Sally finally exploded in anger. Nancy, in tears, slapped her daughter's cheek.
Was all that talk about being too busy with housework to get a part-time job a lie? I heard everything from Michelle yesterday. Even when Michelle was struggling, you just played around, and the money I gave you for allowance was spent on your affairs.
Sally's glare turned sharply to me. Despite being the architect of her own downfall, her look was full of malice, blaming me for everything. Brian stepped between us and stared back at Sally.
Sally, I can't continue with you anymore. I've been working hard from morning till night to earn money for our family, and this is how you spend the allowance I gave you? That's it, we're getting a divorce.
Brian, no longer able to contain his anger, declared their divorce in a deep, serious tone. Sally, shaken by the word divorce, clung to Brian's legs and pleaded loudly not to be abandoned. But neither Brian nor we were willing to listen to her anymore. No matter how much she cried or apologized, our minds were made up. She had to pay for her actions. Then Sally tried to argue.
But where's the real proof that I've been cheating? You talk like I've been cheating all along, but there's no proof.
At this pathetic excuse, I couldn't help but be astounded. Brian had been calming down at that excuse, felt the voltage of his anger heat up again, and I calmly informed Sally that I had proof.
Actually, I have evidence. Recently, the staff at the physical therapy facility recommended a security camera indoors. It's convenient because you can check the footage on your phone.
I showed them the security footage from my phone, which captured Sally's actions after she kicked me out. The camera showed her calling someone and then passionately embracing and kissing the man who came over. Other footage clearly showed Sally's cheating behavior, her complaints about not being able to meet her lover due to my injury, and her plans to use Brian's business trip as an opportunity to invite her lover over.
There's your undeniable proof. So much for your claim of having no evidence of your affair, right? So what if I had another man? You're always at work, and living at home with your mother was suffocating. I didn't do anything wrong.
Sally finally admitted to her infidelity. She had been spending the money Brian and Nancy gave her on her lover for gifts and meals. After admitting her affair, Sally and the man were promptly thrown out. We told her we would discuss everything in detail later. Sally did not respond to his words, but he later visited Brian with the man she was having an affair with, and a discussion was held in the presence of a lawyer. Despite her defiance, the divorce was settled with the security footage as evidence. However, Sally showed no remorse, and not only because of this incident, but because she had caused him trouble in the past, was cut off by both Brian and Nancy.
Stay away from us for good.
Despite being rejected by her loving husband and mother, Sally didn't change her demeanor, almost appearing relieved throughout the discussion. Now free, Sally's affair partner left her, revealing he never had any real feelings for her. Sally, having lived a comfortable life till then, struggled to make ends meet and worked tirelessly to pay off her dues. Brian, now with some financial breathing room after the divorce, started coming home earlier and helped more with household chores, allowing me to focus on my physical therapy. Nancy and I continued our friendship. We may have cut ties with Sally, but Nancy assured me that our friendship was separate from that. I can't thank Nancy enough for believing in me more than her own daughter. Thanks to Brian's dedicated support with the housework and Nancy accompanying me to physical therapy, my mobility has improved significantly from before. Now, one of my greatest joys is having tea at a cafe or window shopping with my dear friend Nancy after physical therapy sessions.